Thank you, everybody, for showing up for a talk about the future. I was asking an Atlassian who shall remain nameless what you guys call yourself. I said, Atlas campers? No. Marketplacians? And I started thinking about it. Well, builders. Builders is close, but you guys are builders who come to Atlas camp. So I thought about that, and I said, well, Atlassian, that's a great word. That's an adjective, too. It's like Herculean, right? Remember Hercules? They cleaned out the stables. But like Atlassian's an even better adjective. It's like you're moving the entire world, right? And so I decided you guys are not only Atlassian builders, but I think you're Atlassians because you're at the center of a cyclone of change that's coming. You guys have your hands on the lever that's really moving the world, because it's not just software that's moving the world. It's collaboration to create great software. So if there's really any one place and time you could be where you could see more cool stuff in a shorter period of time, in the next 10 years, I can't really think what it would be. So it's a privilege to be here and talk about some of that stuff. And our theme is Builders Advancing Humanity, because I think that's what we all aspire to do, each in our own ways. And we're going to look 5 to 25 years out. Most futurists, or foresighters is the professional term, try to look about 5 years out, because it's pretty hard even there. But we're going to go even a little further than that and tell some stories. And I hope if you have any disagreements, you'll bring them up in the Q&A afterwards. I welcome disagreements and political soapboxing and whatever else you want to talk about at the end. And so let's get into the future of building a little bit and see if I can tell you some interesting things. The main thing I want to try and convince you of is something I call a secret, because it's a little sexier to call it a secret, but it's really not a secret. But it's something that people don't normally pay attention to. And if you're not convinced of the secret by the end of this talk, let me know, okay? Many of you are, but some of you aren't. All right. So Atlassian has got some fantastic collaboration tools and platforms, tens of thousands of companies using them. There's all kinds of great stories we could tell around that. I'm not going to go there. You probably heard many of those stories. I'm going to go into some adjacent territory in relation to that secret I want to tell you. And but keep these in mind, because this is where we are today. So first, a little bit about me. That's me in high school, programming that beauty right there, that transportable PC and HP mini computers. Started 3 companies. My 3rd company, I got a good exit, and decided to take that money, go get a couple of masters, and get back to my real high school passion, which is Foresight. And Foresight is basically strategic discussions around the drivers of change. That's what Foresight is. And I've always been interested in that, so when I got my cash, the first thing I did is I said, well, there's all these people out there talking about this thing called the technological singularity. You know, computers, this is 1999. Computers are going to wake up soon. And I wanted to know how realistic and imminent that idea was, so I started this little nonprofit, Acceleration Studies Foundation, to look into it. And we did some conferences at Stanford, some white papers. Next thing you know, I was being called by the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force to talk about technology acceleration. So that was cool. And then I taught some master's courses in technology foresight at a couple universities. That was cool. And I realized that this space is still kind of amateurish, you know? It's great to talk about it, but what really matters is we've got to get together and tell these stories with each other, because half the stories that we tell, you know, a futurist is like alcohol. You want a little bit of it, and you'll get buzzed a little, kind of your performance gets better at pool and things like that. You take a little too much of that stuff without, judgment, and the next thing you know, you're just kind of babbling. Okay. So let's try and rein it in. And the way I rein it in is I run this little nonprofit, or this little for-profit now called the Foresight Company, which gets together and helps people look 5 years out. And I've just finished a book called The Foresight Guide, which helps teams do that, and that's going to be on Amazon next month. And if you send me an email, I'll send you a free ebook when it comes out. So that's me. And our talk today is going to be in 3 sections: where we are, which is already crazy. Where we may be going, and these are some of the fun stories we'll tell. And some tips on driving there in the front seat rather than kind of sitting in the back seat and let other people take you there. Okay? So first, where we are. Well, it's a very complex technological and entrepreneurial world. We know it's going to get more of all three of those. We don't really know how very often. But Foresight can help us do that if we pay close attention to the strategic drivers of change. So here's the secret. There we are, right? Standing on the shoulders of giants. We climbed a little bit up the mountain, starting to feel pretty good about ourselves. The reality is we think linearly and short term. That's how our brains approximate things. But the universe sometimes works exponentially in long term. And everything in the digital space is either exponential or super exponential, which means the doubling times gently shrink. And that means there's a knee of the curve, right? Exponential looks the same whenever we look at it on the curve, but a super exponential has a knee. And so there we are, just heading into this knee of incredibly explosive change. And you may or may not buy this, but I'm going to try and sell that idea to you in a talk. Now, teams that are aware of this, that change their attitudes and behaviors because they know this is coming, working with the right tools and platforms, they're just going to fly right up that value creation curve. The ones that don't, the ones that continue to kind of diddle around and disagree and wait for others to go there, many of them are going to see their forward progress slow or even stop in relative terms. So this is really interesting, and it's an important thing to know this secret. Now, the way you know it's not BS is you go and talk to some of the people in physics and information theory, and you can find a few of these J-curves out there, and this is my favorite one. This is a curve of energy density usage. It turns out complex systems that learn, use energy at a rate that determines how fast they can increase their learning. And complex adaptive systems in our universe have popped out over universal time, and they fit on this J-curve of energy flow density. What is that? That's energy flowing through the system, like a tornado or a human, per gram per second. So it's a weight and a second and a time-based measure. And it turns out that plants, like this sunflower, have 1,000-fold more energy flowing through their bodies per gram and per second than stars like our sun. So this thing here, it warms our face from 8 million miles away. It feels great. It doesn't have much complexity in it at all. It's like a big fluffy cloud. So it can't increase its complexity. Now, these guys, they've increased their complexity incredibly. Turns out that brains are yet another 1,000-fold more energy flow dense than plants. And they emerged just a few million years ago. But the things that have the highest energy flow density that we know of are in our pockets. Computer chips have 1,000,000-fold more energy flow density per gram per second than human brains. Coursing through their tiny transistors, it's basically like an instantaneous learning explosion. That's really what a computer is. So they're improving their complexity, or let's be more careful, their information production, at rates that make us look like we're standing still, just like plants are standing still relative to us. So the universe apparently wants to do this acceleration. And seeing acceleration is kind of like taking the red pill. Remember that? The first thing you do is you say, no, John, it's not J-curves, it's S-curves. Everything's S-curves. Well, yeah, but it turns out that we're constantly jumping to new and steeper S-curves as we port from one hardware system and one software system to another. And the hardware systems that we're in determine the performance ceiling of each S-curve. And the software that we're using, how automated and connected it is, determines how fast we scale that S-curve before it becomes obsolete, and now we have conditions to create a new one. So our software is getting more automated and intelligent. It's still in its infancy today compared to where it's going to be. And our performance ceilings, the physicists say, well, there's something called the Planck scale. That's probably the computational limits of miniaturization and efficiency. We're nowhere near it, okay? So it doesn't even make sense for us to look for those limits today. What we should be looking for is the next steeper S-curve, because they're constantly going to be rising all around us the rest of our lives. Okay, so that's an important part of the secret to kind of realize is. And this translates directly into economic value creation. Okay, so here's the growth of Snapchat user adoption. Looks kind of like a little J-curve. All of a sudden it hit that kind of corner, didn't it? And this is the curve of GDP per capita in Europe over 1,000 years. And on that scale, there's the knee of the curve. What was that? Anyone want to guess? Yeah, Industrial Revolution, 1800s. So it looks almost vertical on that scale, doesn't it? And it's basically made up of a bunch of these little guys. So the value creation just keeps going like that, because today, money isn't even physical stuff. It's just bits we're pushing through pipes, right? So it's more and more abstract. And yes, this economic value creation is going to continue doing this if the fundamental productivity of the machines is going to keep doing that Moore's Law stuff we talked about. And Snapchat, I mean, look at that. They didn't even create a new feature. Well, they did. They took away a feature. They took away permanency in shared text and photos. But that one hack was so useful to people that they exponentially shared it, or rather super exponentially shared it, didn't they? So you guys should be constantly looking for those J-curves of user adoption, because they're always going to be out there, and that's kind of a builder's key challenge, or an Atlassian's key challenge. Can I call you guys Atlassians? Okay, y'all are, right? Okay, thanks. And so, remember that Daft Punk song? Well, this here is kind of my Daft Punk song for how that curve, why that curve's so vertical, okay? Builders are constantly making hardware that's faster, smaller, and cheaper, and they're making software that's smarter, stabler, and better. And that's just going to continue for the rest of our lives, faster and faster than we expect, because that curve seems baked into the physics of the system, right? So builders are going into physical inner space by shrinking stuff, and they're going into virtual inner space by making things smarter, stabler, and better. And one way we make things stabler and better is by making them anti-fragile. Occasionally I'm going to throw a few books up in the upper right-hand corner, and I list at the end of the slides too. But this is a particularly good book for understanding how to build software that's more reliable and more secure. Anti-fragile systems are systems that get stabler when you stress them, like crowd-trained spam filters, penetration testing, bug bounties, human immune systems. So the more we make systems that get stabler when we stress them, the more we keep this curve doing what it's doing. Now, you remember that curve way back, and we saw how smooth it was going vertically? Well, that was over 1,000 years, wasn't it? Shrink it down to our scale, and you got booms and busts. You got companies succeeding, going bankrupt, some features going super exponential, and others falling flat. So as these guys said, who doesn't know these guys, by the way? Any hands in the room? Okay. One or two. Okay. So you have a treat coming. This is Game of Thrones. And that's Varys and Littlefinger. And as they're arguing in this episode over chaos, what's chaos? Is it a pit or is it a ladder? Turns out it's both. And if you see those ladders, if you see those J-curves of user adoption that are jumping up all around you and of new product performance, you can basically climb your way right out of the pit. You got to build your system strong and resilient, because the damage, the chaos is always going to be around you, right? You got to pay close attention to those competitors and be as, be as conniving as these guys sometimes. Now, another aspect of that chaos is what's called Kuznets curve. This is a beautiful curve, really worth understanding. Simon Kuznets got a Nobel Prize for it back in the 50s for discovering that when technology first kind of explodes into an environment, like in the Industrial Revolution, and again in the Information Revolution, rich-poor divides go up. And so does urban pollution, by the way. He discovered that too. And then later, as societies get more and more rich per capita, what happens to those things? They finally start coming back down the other side of a curve, right? And it turns out that all kinds of technology has these Kuznets effects. Things get worse before they get better. Certain social variables get worse. And so you should expect that chaos. First generation calculators, did they make us more or less numerate? Less. First generation video games, we go asocial, get in our little caves, don't pay attention to each other. First generation cell phones, we drive like we're drunk. First generation PCs, they release them with no immune systems, and so it trains up a whole kind of hacker culture. Exploits just take off. So first generation systems can actually make systems worse. Second generation, they stay worse. Third generation, they finally start to get better. So as a builder, if you ask yourself, well, what does a Kuznets curve mean to me? It means the faster you can jump through versions 1 and 2 to the more humanizing versions of your technology, the faster you get to a system that truly empowers. Calculators today, kids have graphing functions on them, and they can have an understanding that a graduate student would have. But the interfaces still suck. They can't speak to them. They're going to be speaking to them in the next generation. So technically, what this means is you can either incredibilize or wallify your users by your system design. If you incredibilize them, you empower them, they become more critically thinking, more self-actualized, more creative, bolder. If you wallify them, you get a little more passive. Some of their abilities atrophy a little bit. Take away some of their self-determination. And, you know, relaxing is nice, but if you relax too much, you can get an idiocracy. And no democracy that wants to stay competitive or relevant wants that. So let's incredibilize people, because we can do it. So if we ask, how is building different today than for our parents? Boil it down for me, John, 3 words. I'd pick these: openness, tools, and scale. Now we've got these global open repos and open social coding platforms like Bitbucket and that little tiny one, GitHub, right? We've got all kinds of open source hardware tools, PSOC and Arduino microcontrollers, revolutionizing hardware design. But it's software that's really eating the world, like Andreessen said in 2011. It's virtualizing, quantifying, automating the world. And it's doing it at the speed of electrons. This is almost the speed of light, right? Just blowing across the planet. And scale, we have incredible scale today. I mean, 5 billion cell phone users in 2017, according to Statista. Half of them are going to be 4G. Another 5 years later, everyone's going to have them. And they're not just going to be 4G, they'll be smart. We'll talk about that in a moment. There's 18 million coders globally. Evans Data Corp says there's going to be 25 million in 5 more years. Really interesting. Moore's Law is growing at 30% a year still. And searchable online data, the most amazing statistic, is growing at 55% a year. And now there's 5 zettabytes on the planet, searchable information now. I don't know how much that is. That's 5 trillion gigabytes. I don't know, iPads from here to the moon, I think it's like 4 or 5 times. I can't give you the concept. I can't wrap my head around it, okay? But it's big. And it grows at 55% a year, which means it's doubling in less than 2 years. So if we ask ourselves about DevOps, you can say, well, it's a people-technology partnership. Always has been, always will be. Here's the Mobius loop of DevOps. And you know, people and technology are key to both sides of this, to every step of this, right? But up in the upper right corner, I've got freestyle chess. How many people know what that is? Freestyle chess? Anybody seen it? Heard of it? So top-ranked chess players in the world today on the chess rankings, nice objective ranking of how smart people are at this particular game. They're not people and they're not programs anymore. They're teams of junior-level chess players working with ensembles of chess-playing AIs in creative ways, and using their own intuition in combination with what the machines tell them. If we think about DevOps, that's what we're doing too. We've gone away from waterfall and all these staged gated things, slow things, to teams of more and more junior level players working with virtualized tools to crank that loop of product user fit faster and faster, with more and more of a technology component. And so we ask ourselves about cloud, like Mike talked about in the opening yesterday. You know, the numbers there are truly staggering. The numbers and the features that are blowing into the cloud space are just incredible. Amazon's growing their platform, they're still the largest currently, at 50% a year, almost as fast as the web's growing its data. They add as much new storage every day as they had to house their entire 2004 e-tailing database, hiring 300 workers a day for their retail fulfillment, right? Trying to disrupt Walmart now in retail. And then all these other guys, they've got cloud platforms and tools too, and two of them on that graph are growing much faster than Amazon from a smaller base. So all kinds of interesting differentiations happening in cloud, and we're going to talk a little bit about IBM in a couple slides. So the environmental conditions we have today are allowing some companies to blow up so fast that a new term was invented for them in 2011 by Eileen Lee called unicorns, rare and magical creatures that go from startup to over $1 billion in valuation in under 10 years. And it turns out they're not even rare and magical anymore. There's over 80 of them now. And the rate at which we're building these unicorns is happening faster and faster. Most of them are in software, but some, like you really want to create a fast-growing unicorn, use software to repurpose mass hardware, the way Airbnb and Uber and BlaBlaCar here in Europe for ride-sharing. I mean, that's a fast way to blow up a unicorn. Atlassian, of course, is a unicorn. Started in 2002. It's got, for my slide, I said, in my notes, I put 1,200 employees. Come here and I find out it's 1,800. It's like, oops. That's how fast this stuff moves, right? It's truly Atlassian. They're in 12 cities, 44,000 companies. My stats are probably old, so I apologize for that because I got them a few weeks ago. 1,800 add-ons in the marketplace. And it's truly amazing to be part of that. And what you do with that is completely up to you. You're in one of those rare spaces where you're just going to see that blow up. All right, so we've covered some of the reasons to take that curve seriously. Now let's look a little bit about where we may be going. How many people know what this is? Any hands? Love to see this one always. No? Okay. So this is a small team in San Francisco. People say there's going to be 2 billion cars sold in emerging countries over the next, I think it's 25 years. A lot of cars. Well, these guys think it's not going to be cars, it's going to be these. This is a car, but it's actually a motorcycle. It's a two-wheel motorcycle, a two-wheel car. It's got 2 gyros in it, keep it upright at a stop, seat belt, 5-point seat belt, internal and external airbags, legally lane splits, so it gets from point A to point B in a city about twice as fast as a car in rush hour traffic, parks in about 1/3 of the space of a Cooper Mini, half the price of a regular car. It's a motorcycle with software and smarts, right? The fact that this company hasn't been bought by Tesla yet to be their knife edge into the third world right now, because these things are being made today. There's 3 of them running around San Francisco today, like those self-driving cars you see in Mountain View. The fact that they haven't done that shows that they're not seeing that J-curve. Because as futurists, we come across stories like this and we say, oh yeah, that's a big piece of the future right there. Many people are never going to, in the third world, in the emerging nations, are never going to buy a car. They'll just go to this, and then these can self-drive later on, right? So the future's weird, but we can see pieces of it in advance. Let's look now at one of the cloud strategies from one of those players we saw on the slide previously, IBM. You know, they've got this idea of leading the smart cloud, and they call their effort cognitive computing. And Carl Kranzel, IBM Watson Developer Cloud says, well, there's three main things that are different today. There's algorithms and infrastructure and data are all going dynamic. We got the elastic cloud for infrastructure. We've got elastic data out there. We throw our nets just wide enough or our spears just narrow enough to pick the data that we want out of the rivers that are out there. And algorithms as a service. So they're putting together algorithms as a service in 4 categories: perceiving, learning, relating, and reasoning. And so that's their plan for creating smart machine learning services, right, on top of the cloud. And we also have to remember that culture, in this case IBM's culture, community, speed of execution, and trust, those are people factors that are just as important to whatever technology strategy they're going to use to try and be at the top of that cloud space, smart cloud space in 10 years. And a fun question to ask is, the tools that they're using today, they're high capital. Those are going to be cheap and commoditized tomorrow. So who's going to be carving off pieces of that smart cloud? Well, it's pretty much anybody's guess in anybody's market, because we're just now seeing where it's going. Another really fun question to ask, say, well, if we look back in 10 years and we write the history of the web later, by popular account, what are we going to call this next era? If we're in the social web today, what's the next one going to be called? Well, my bet is it's going to be something like the agent web. Well, what's the agent web? Well, today we have algorithms out there and platforms that are anticipating our needs, like Google Now and Siri. And they're suggesting things for us, and we're giving primitive feedback to them, to those suggestions, crowd training the system. So if you think about that kind of prediction engine and where it gets a little bit more advanced, and now it's collecting more and more of your user data, at a certain point you start calling that thing an agent, an assistive agent. That's your interface term for what it is, what the key features that you use are. And I think that agent web is going to be commonplace just 5 years from now. Lots of big companies are in this space, mid-sized companies like Speak to It, lots of small companies like Next IT, where I'm an advisor. Hound, with their little Hound assistive agent, just came out last week on Android. Ridiculously smart. Remember SoundHound is the one you start humming to it and it tells you the song. But now you can speak to it too and it'll tell you more, like songs that are similar to that. And it's like, the agents are supposed to be incredible. And I expect leaders like Atlassian are going to be at the center of this agent web, because it's only folks like you who can build these things one version at a time. So right now we're seeing little peaks of it. I think it's going to be a really big part of the future. To understand why the agent web is going to scale up so fast, we have to talk about something called deep machine learning. We all remember machine learning and various algorithms we use, trying to get a system, get a computer to understand things. Remember neural nets in college and backpropagation, where you had a future target and you would try and train the system toward the target? Well, so that's machine learning. Deep machine learning is when we use unstructured data. It doesn't have to be pretty. And we don't have any prior training sets. We just let the system go. And I think it's going to be a big piece of the smart cloud that's coming. So let's watch a little short clip from Jeremy Howard, who's running a machine learning startup called Analytic in San Francisco. Kind of get a sense of what some of the capabilities of this new kind of machine learning are.
It shows that computers can listen and understand.
Now, the last step that I want to be able to take in this process is to actually speak to you in Chinese. Now, the key thing there is we've been able to take a large amount of information from many Chinese speakers and produce a text-to-speech system that takes Chinese text and converts it into Chinese language. And then we've taken an hour or so of my own voice, and we've used that to modulate the standard text-to-speech system so that it would sound like me. Again, the results are not perfect. There are, in fact, quite a few errors.
结果并不完美。他们集体阐述改作业。
There's much work to be done in this area.
So that's available for developers now on Windows 10 in 2 languages.
So deep learning is this extraordinary thing. It's a single algorithm that can seem to do almost anything. And I discovered that a year earlier, it had also learnt to see. In this obscure competition from Germany called the German Traffic Sign Benchmark, deep learning had learnt to recognize traffic signs like this one.
That's 2011.
Not only could it recognize the traffic signs better than any other algorithm, the leaderboard actually showed it was better than people, about twice as good as people. So by 2011, we had the first example of computers that can see.
Call that superhuman performance.
Since that time, a lot has happened. In 2012, Google announced that they had a deep learning algorithm watch YouTube videos and crunch the data on 16,000 computers for a month. And the computer independently learned about concepts such as people and cats just by watching the videos. This is much like the way that humans learn. Humans don't learn by being told what they see, but by learning for themselves what these things are. Also in 2012, Geoffrey Hinton, who we saw earlier, won the very popular ImageNet competition, looking to try to figure out from 1.5 million images what they're pictures of. As of 2014, we're now down to a 6% error rate in image recognition. This is better than people again. So machines really are doing an extraordinarily good job of this, and it is now being used in industry. And here is some text that an algorithm out of Stanford generated. Each of these sentences was generated by a deep learning algorithm to describe each of those pictures. This algorithm before has never seen a man in a black shirt playing a guitar. It's seen a man before, it's seen black before, it's seen a guitar before, but it has independently generated this novel description of this picture. We're still not quite at human performance here, but we're close. In tests, humans prefer the computer-generated caption 1 out of 4 times. This system is now only 2 weeks old, so probably within the next year, the computer algorithm will be well past human performance at the rate things are going.
So that's cool. You get to hear Jeremy make a specific prediction, right? Auto-captioning, going to be past the Turing test by 12 months later, and we'll get to see, won't we, in December, if that's true. And this is the world we're in today. Now, how many people knew about this auto-captioning thing already being 25%? See, there's people who've been following this stuff, right? You guys aren't going to get taken by surprise. But there's other people in this room who said, nah, that wasn't going to come this early. Okay, well, got the smelling salts for you here. It is coming this early, okay? This stuff is going to keep moving faster than we expect it to. And you know, in college, we learned about neural nets, and we said, yeah, okay, they don't work so well. They kind of run out of steam after a little while, and so do genetic algorithms. All that stuff's kind of like, okay, that's first-gen stuff. Well, deep learning's a baby, and what are babies good for? Growing up. Okay, this thing's going to grow up fast, okay? And one sign that it is all the hardware people are taking it seriously now. In April 2016, NVIDIA is releasing Pascal, which is some hardware that's going to accelerate deep learning training time 10-fold. And lots of people are going to start using it at that point. We've got open source tools like Open Computer Vision, which just went 3.0. Lots of new features in it. There's a great 21-day course online if you want to learn computer vision and teach your webcam to recognize your car when it comes into the driveway and all kinds of other cool stuff. OpenNLP for natural language processing. We've even seen incredible stunts like Google's Project Soli with a little micro radar chip. You guys probably saw that a couple weeks ago. You can, it's got one single radar source, but it uses Doppler, and with deep learning parsing the signal data, it can actually tell. You can do little button pushes and sliders and everything in the air above whatever technology has that chip now. So now you have a gestural interface with one sensor and deep learning on the signal data, okay? So this stuff is just going to keep coming faster and faster. And now we get to the crazy slides. As a futurist, these are my favorite stories to tell because we're going to go way out here, okay? You can tell me I'm wrong. Tell me if this is a weeble or not, which is a story that gets back up after you criticize it, or if this is something you can, a straw man, you can knock it over, okay? We got Google's Knowledge Graph today. We know that Google learned to Knowledge Graph learned to fact check websites a few months ago. Remember that? Now, pages that have too many factually incorrect statements get pushed lower in the PageRank algorithm. I want you to imagine a knowledge graph that can map sentiment, intentions, goals, even values from online activities. And you and I are kind of pruning the metadata by user association and feedback. Well, in that kind of world, anyone that has email or a social network platform, they can put you in touch with the handful of other people in the world who are thinking about starting that same business, project, or social action as you without revealing each other's private data. All the kids are going to turn that feature right on, aren't they? All of us are going to go, I don't know, that's kind of creepy. But you want to imagine what that world is like. That's a world where we're not famous to 15 people, or sorry, 15 minutes anymore, like Andy Warhol said. We're famous to 15 people. We're all developing sub-specializations and finding those other people that most value what we're doing and learning. And marketers in that world aren't going to have to throw surveys at you. They're going to be able to directly survey the values-mapped web and find out what people's values are. And all the builders who want to start something are going to be able to search that and see what pain points are out there and develop some new solution. So that's a very different world once we're at that level of the semantic web. It's still not even a full semantic web. So in the next 5 years, I think we're going to see some development studios for assistive agents coming out from some of the big players. And we're going to see agents for software development too, which is going to lower the threshold for building and increase the power of building at the same time. And it'll be really interesting to see that happen. So play that forward, another 5 years in this value cosm world, and the 27 million coders that I mentioned we'll have in 2020, we could have hundreds of millions, even billions of conversational coders who are interacting via NLP with this kind of deep learning web, curating all kinds of specific knowledge domains. You think Wikipedia is awesome? Imagine what that's going to be, that kind of bottom-up Wikipedia we're going to create. Okay? Small companies are launching agents today, and it's easy to find technical help if you want to go to web intelligence or agents and data mining interaction or predictive analytics world. You'll find all kinds of people out there who can help you stand these up. And I'd recommend paying attention to those and getting some facility with those so you can be ready for them and be an early adopter when they finally scale. Okay, so let's go a little further out, talk about that technological singularity thing. There's a lot of people who think that we're going to see this in our lifetimes. Ray Kurzweil says that by 2030 or 2040, we're going to have computers that claim to be self-aware, and you're not going to believe them at first, but they're going to be exponentially persuasive, is the term he says. Then there's people like me who think, well, okay, that's possible, but I think it's going to be later. It's going to be later because doing this stuff is harder than we think. We still haven't decoded how the brain actually does all of this long-term memory storage, although we've decoded working and short-term memory. So we've got 2 of the 3 already. And also, once we get semi-smart machines in, say, the 2030s, all the engineers and the insurers and the politicians are going to start raising the safety bar, the reliability bar, and that's going to slow down the transition. And I think that's a good thing. Think about how careful we are with deployment of nuclear power and drones and self-driving cars today. I think in the 2030s, the deep learning-based robots and cars, machines that we want to use, we're going to have even wealthier and even more motivated to have what they call high reliability standards, right? Now, unfortunately, humans don't seem smart enough to code either higher intelligence or a fail-safe morality into machines. But in a deep learning future, fortunately, we don't have to do that. Nature did quite a good job at coding social intelligence and morality, social morality in all kinds of species. And humans even did it too. 10,000 years ago, you couldn't trust some of these animals in rooms with small babies. Version 1.0 of those animals didn't really trust them. But after 5,000 selection cycles, we know exactly which animals we can trust and which ones we can't, even though their brains are black boxes to us. Likewise, the kind of neural net code of these deep learning-based AIs that we're going to see in, say, the 2030s to 2060s, again, the way we're going to trust them is through proven trustworthiness by past experience. So you never get true safety. You're always seeking what they call safety in the average. you got a whole bunch of things that are safe, so if a rogue or an accident pops up, you've got safety in the average to protect you. That's pretty much how we work with domestic animals today, and I think it's going to work the same way in a deep learning future. Technology is also going to be pushing out our cognitive limits and our emotional limits, and one of my favorite stories to tell is something called the group net. This is a world where our wearable sensors kind of shrink into our clothes, broadband gets cheap. This is probably 2020s. What happens in a group net world, I've got Google group net up here, but it really should be Atlassian group net because everybody's going to have them. And Atlassian actually has many of the tools to create some of the first group nets, as we'll see. But a group net's basically a world where people who are 24/7 connected to other people they want to be connected to start outperforming people who aren't. People who are isolated get outperformed in work, in school, and in life. Why? Why do they get outperformed? Because if you have a software platform that's quantifying and visualizing group behavior, that's nudging you towards better etiquette, keeping you from being a free rider, constantly asking questions and not giving anything back, and that's maximizing cognitive and skills diversity in the group. Make sure you have the future doctor, future lawyer, all the people in that little high school group net, so you can ask anyone a question. It's like, who wants to be a millionaire? You got a lifeline to anybody, right? Well, those groups, they're just going to totally outperform people who aren't connected. And all kinds of new capabilities are going to come available to you. When you go in for a job interview in 2030, you're going to have an interview with your group net on, because you're going to be way more empowered, and another one with it off. Just like, remember this college, you had those open and closed book tests? And I'd love to see Atlassian creating a group net for DevOps, because you guys have all these tools on your desktop today, or almost all of them, right? So we're getting really close to a world where kind of the virtual rigs that we have can actually kind of turn into this kind of a system where you really feel connected up when you're in your sprints and stuff. Another really interesting future story is what's called global English. 4 billion more people are going to come online between now and 2025. Okay? It's the last big doubling that's going to happen in the online world. And some futurists predict that over the next 25 years, we're going to see as many as 500 million new people learn global languages. So English, French, German, Spanish, and a handful of others. Now, I think most of them are going to learn English because that's the global language of business and it has 1 million words in its vocabulary. The cool thing is when people do that, they actually start thinking in terms of the culture that uses those languages. So 5 times as many people are going to lean back and they're going to use those automatic language translation things that you saw there from Microsoft. But the 500 million who choose to lean forward, well, those kids are going to get the highest salaries and the telework that they're going to do on the Confluences, the Odesks, and the LinkedIns of the 2020s. Does that make sense? So I think that's going to take global entrepreneurship and specialization to kind of whole new levels we haven't seen before. You think about all those incredibly underemployed, eager kids, the same kids that fueled the Chinese economic miracle we saw in the last 20 years. Now we're talking twice as many of them learning all the main languages. And the way they're going to do it is that system is going to teach them the second language while they're using their primary language. They call it teacherless education. They're just going to look down on their smartwatch and things going to give them the word in the secondary language for the word that they're speaking right there in the primary language. Play a little game. It's all going to be free, won't it? The last big thing to think about is that about this acceleration is crowds are increasingly driving change. World Bank says in 2025, crowdfunding is going to be $95 billion. It's $5 billion today. Well, $95 billion is 1.8 times more than all global venture capital today. So the argument is that bottom-up funding is going to outcompete top-down funding. And crowd-solving is also accelerating. You've got Kaggle, 200,000 data scientists. They'll solve your data problems for a $10,000 bounty or $300 an hour. You've got Algorithmia running bounties for algorithms. You've got Incentive with 1/3 technical solvers working on bounties. You got Gerson Lehrman Group, which already has 250,000 crowd-ranked experts, each rentable by the hour. And we haven't even enabled these folks with Bitcoin or smart contracts yet. Now we have Chris Mountford in the room, who's done some very noble experiments adding financial transactions, digital currencies to HipChat. And I'd argue you're going to need a whole lot more of those going forward as we empower crowds with these kinds of platforms. And probably the most empowering thing that's going to happen in the crowd space in the next year is equity crowdfunding is going to be legal probably in January 2016 if the second half of the Jobs Act passes. That means you and I are going to be able to not only crowdfund things, we're going to be able to crowdfound them and get tiny bits of equity like an angel investor or a venture capitalist. It's going to be legal for us to do that, just like it is for accredited investors today to be a venture capitalist. You and I are going to be launching all of these little IPO, or taking little pieces of these early IPOs in the crowdfunding world of 2016. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. Let's take stock for a moment. I've introduced the secret of accelerating change, and I've talked about how smart software and crowds and teams are going to take this acceleration even further out than many of us are thinking. And we have two choices. We can drive those changes ourselves, or we can be driven there by others. You know, someone has to enable these millions of minds that are, or actually billions of minds that are coming online in the next 15 years. It might as well be us, right? And so I'm going to offer 4 tips for driving. First is talking about values. Second is biases. Third is being a servant leader. And fourth is being agile, and just a couple of things that word means. First, values. Atlassian has some pretty amazing values. They really do differentiate them from other communities. If you have great values, your culture can get messed up as you grow as fast as Atlassian is, but the values are like a magnet. They just keep pulling the community back to what you want it to be. Okay? That was Kate Staunton said that, Atlassian. I stole her phrase there. And if you find yourself not having some values, some of the values that you would like, you can enlist other people to help you stamp those out. Attenuate them, they call it. They just kind of slowly decay, right? You stop feeding them. So if you're not quite as much of a team player, or you're not quite as open as you should be, first thing is to do is develop self-awareness, right? That's half the battle, seeing that you're not where you want to be with regard to those. Second is get others to help you. And when you have these kind of values, when you have a good set of values, the employees, not only do they run themselves, they measure their own progress with things like OKRs. How many people know what OKRs are? Yeah. So Atlassian is going to be adopting those, or they're adopting them right now, right? And that's the ability to set your own performance measures from the bottom up. It's really fantastic, agile tool. So that brings us to our second tip, which is countering your biases, knowing them and countering them. Here's a great book on that. Helps you understand the difference between your turtle speed, deliberative logical mind, and your rabbit speed, emotional intuitive mind. And each of us has biases. Groupthink is a really common bias on teams. Each of us has a job to disagree. And if you recognize that, you can counter that bias. But again, the first thing is bias awareness. Oh. And then another thing is, as we get older, we kind of get more set in our ways. They call it the experience trap. You know an excellent way out of that box? It's called reverse mentoring. How many people know what, or have heard of reverse mentoring before? It's a beautiful phrase. Yeah. So Salim Ismail came up with the concept, and it's basically, you know, the older I get, I have more experience. First thing I do is I find someone to mentor, because I got to share it. Second thing I do is I ask that person to mentor me. Tell me if you think I'm being crabby and, you know, got my blinders on. Challenge my assumptions. Make me see the world through your eyes. The older we get, the more unlearning we have to do of some of our experience so we can do more learning. Does that make sense? They call that the unlearning-learning ratio. It just keeps going up. So that's biases. Servant leadership is finding something that you think is worth leading. Doesn't matter how small it is. Find something, be bold, be a leader in that thing. A Wikipedia page, doesn't matter what it is. Confluence, space, this is mine. Okay. And then empower other people to make that thing better. Don't do it yourself. Sit back and help them do it. That's servant leadership. Two great things come from that. First, you don't get egotistical. And second, you get people on your team who are better than you. And they stay there. They stay on the team. You know they're more talented than you. How's that possible? Okay? And I think Mike and Scott are really good at that. And that's why they've stayed centered, even though they've had tremendous personal success. And if you want some cautionary stories for what happens when you don't do that, read $1 Billion Lessons. It's full of stories of companies with lots of money and top talent who thought they pretty much were invincible. As soon as they think that way, the universe is going to prove them otherwise, right? So the last tips we have are about being agile, just being as bottom-up, transparent, efficient, and autonomous as possible. Eric Ries's Lean Startup's a great book on that. I strongly recommend joining a lean circle or starting one in your city if there isn't one. And again, like Chris said earlier today in his Bruce Lee talk on Agile, get your thinking about dev and ops as broad as you can when you're a Scrum Master or when you're thinking in terms of Agile. Every assumption of management culture, question it. And what you'll discover is cool things that are out there, like OKRs. We described them. Are you using them? No. Well, let's do it. I want to see my individual OKRs and then the team OKRs, and then we push those up to the top. They work oppositely from the top telling the bottom what to do. Can your team determine stock options partly by peer evaluations like High Fidelity does? That's a pretty cool bottom-up thing, isn't it? Why not? Let's try it. Do I need HR enforcing one restrictive way of doing things across the whole country or company? Or can I be like Favi and every customer-facing team has its own HR and they can do their own hiring and they do their own forms and do their own stuff their own way and then they all watch each other? Because they decided HR isn't that important. Being agile in HR is more important for Favi. And can you experiment with and evaluate new collaboration and analytics tools, including those of your competitors? Agile means maximum transparency, creative diversity, and autonomy in your workflow, right? Another really useful measure of agility is bottom-up ideation, idea generation. There are several mid-market companies now that create these ideation platforms. Anyone in the team and anyone in the user base can suggest ideas, and they are crowd-ranked against each other for benefit-cost ratio. You don't have to determine what the benefits are of one idea. You just compare Jane's idea to Joe's idea. Does that make sense? And then the system just kind of bubbles up the 3 most useful ideas from the last month, and those get pushed right into management, and now they say, do something with those. I'd love to see Atlassian buy or build one of these companies in coming years, because ideation platforms are going to become a really important tool of Agile, I think. And another great tool you guys are familiar with is structured freedom. Google and Atlassian's 20% time, or 3M and P&G and Intuit's 15 or 10% time. This is where if you're meeting expectations, your manager tries to push you out to go do something with some free time. See what you can create. Now, only a tiny fraction of people in the company, maybe 10% typically, are going to be doing that at any one time. But the important thing is that it's available. You can take 1 week every 5 if you're doing Innovation Week, or 1 Friday every 5 days if you're doing 20% time on a weekly basis. Go do that thing, and it turns out you keep your innovators. They're not going to leave. And occasionally you're going to get some really great things out of it, like Jira Service Desk, which is one of the fastest growing platforms that Atlassian created from an Innovation Week, and all kinds of little incremental innovations as well. And as long as you're giving bonuses and even equity for some of those big ideas, you're going to keep that structured freedom creating some really interesting things. And lastly, remember to hire people who are bold and who like playing. Okay? They're not just incentivized by money, they think like kids. Because in an accelerating world, is past experience or playing with things going to find the next big thing faster? What do you think? The latter. Past experience becomes less and less valuable. Isn't that amazing? Now, I just told you a story. You can knock that down and say, no, that's wrong, John. That's the way I see it. And agile companies love experimentation. Damon Edwards said, you know, DevOps started with scientific management 100 years ago. Well, it wasn't called DevOps then. It was Taylorism. And then in the 80s, or sorry, in the second half of the 20th century, we got Kaizen, continuous improvement, and the Toyota way. And that's another big piece of DevOps. And the third big piece he sees today is now we want constant experimentation, parallelizing, just trying experiments, seeing what might work better. And so that means we want to empower people to be internal entrepreneurs and data scientists both. We saw how the structured freedom can get you thinking like an entrepreneur. Well, the data science piece, that's the other really important part of what's new in DevOps, according to Edwards, right? It's a great podcast, by the way. So I'd like to ask you some questions. Do you do A/B tests with your workflow? Are your marketers on board for doing A/B tests? Are you guys running new business models in different markets just to see what happens? And if you don't do an experiment, they can be really costly. This book has a great example of Netflix. Remember when Netflix tried to unbundle their DVD rental and streaming? They said, hey, we're going to offload that cognitive overhead to the consumer. We're going to make they previously had both. We're going to make them choose which one is more important to them. People were so pissed off, they punished Netflix stock. Lost 70% of its value. It stayed down there for 2 years afterwards. Remember that? Now, if they'd run that experiment in one city first, imagine what they would have learned. First, it was a terrible idea. Good data on your team can also help guide your experiments. There's an Aussie startup called Catapult Sports. They got these wearable sensors. And sports analytics is this whole new field now where you can take that data and find out how to make your team better. Miami Heat started using them, and they discovered players like Sean Battier. His stats weren't improving, but every time he was on the floor, the team stats went up. So imagine all the hidden stars you have in your DevOps teams. Imagine all the things you're currently deciding by your favorite agile theory or your dodgy intuition rather than the latest data. Imagine if you went out and got that data. You could find out who works best together, who's ready for virtual work, how long sprints should be, what kind of recoveries work best, how much dark work should be allowed, how much customer feedback do I want, all those cool things. So I would argue that's really, sports analytics gives us a peek to where builders are going to be taking analytics, people analytics in coming years. Atlassian's builder community has made a host of great add-ons for Confluence and Jira Server. You've got server like Stash, and you've got cloud like Bitbucket, and you often have to ask, well, where do I want to put my energies? You know, the mature adult or the fast-growing baby? Well, like Mike said, if you want to support, upgrade, be global with people, build teams faster, more and more the answer is now cloud. All the stuff we've talked about today, almost all of it, that's all going to be cloud stuff, isn't it? So the more, and you can use cloud to reinvent your value proposition and align it better to your users as well. So I'm trying to make a pitch to you to think that way, get there first, because that space is just going to keep doing amazing things. The last tip is don't neglect your own learning. Remember GIGO, garbage in means garbage out? There's another one, great inputs create great outputs. If you guys have some of the best inputs coming in, you're going to become top performers. So there's a lot of things that are important to inputs. You know, there's information, there's food, there's diet, there's breaks, there's sleep, there's fun in exotic European cities. Right? And if you track things like your diet and your exercise or your sleep, I recommend tracking your learning. I recommend getting at least 1 hour of learning, quality learning every day. You say, John, that's a lot. Can't do that. Well, in a world of accelerating change, I think an hour of quality learning is your ticket to the game. And don't just get that hour. By the way, you can get that hour really easily in things like podcasts and audiobooks for exercise and commutes. Highly recommend that. Just stack them all up into that little wearable, put it in your caps, waiting for you to go out. Okay. Well, when you finish that hour, tweet it or post it somewhere so all your friends can see it and you're going to motivate them to learn as well. Do whatever you can to reboot your childlike learning abilities because building is going to get continually more amazing every year for the rest of our lives. That's guaranteed. I hope this talk has sparked some useful action items, at least 1 or 2. Here's some books you can skim, index to the slides, which are going to be available online along with the slide notes. And I think if you have some of your team skim one of these books, spend a couple hours. Read a book like a movie. 2-3 hours later, it goes up on your shelf. If you need to read the whole book, it'll call to you later. But put it on your shelf, because if you don't put it on your shelf after 2 or 3 hours, guess what? You're not going to buy any new books. And guess what? There's 300,000 books that come out in the English language every year, nonfiction, and you want to be reading the best one of those every week or 2. Well, not reading, skimming. And if you skim those, I promise you're going to end up reading a whole book, a lot more, by the end of the year. And if you have your team do a 5-minute lightning talk on the best things I got out of a 3-hour skim of a book, your team's going to become presentation pros and learning ninjas, right? All right, so for the future of building, I think the sky is not going to be the limit. Great teams are going to take us to new places in inner space and new frontiers in outer space. I urge you to take the secret of accelerating change and don't think of it as a threat. Think of it as an incredible opportunity. You know, the acceleration may be the inevitable part, but your attitude toward it and your actions are the inevitable part, if I can use that. And if you truly drive with acceleration in mind, I think you're going to take yourself, your families, and your teams much further and much faster than you ever imagined before. Thank you. Got time for little questions. Sorry. I think we have a little time for a couple questions. Soapboxes. Anybody want to object to any of this?
Why English and not Chinese?
Say again?
Why English and not Chinese?
Fantastic question. There's 2 main reasons. Number 1, English stole more words earlier from more countries, and more cultures. So Chinese use English language loanwords for law and medicine and all kinds of technical things. And number 2, their symbolic language is actually between 2 to 3 times harder to learn than our very reduced code set. People argue over it, but harder. So we've kind of got there first with this global language of business, and I'm not arguing that Mandarin won't be one of those, and I should have mentioned it, along with German and French and all those others. Those guys are all going to explode. But I think English is going to explode the fastest. That's my argument. That Wikipedia for learning English, the free online open source games, the casual games for learning English, having your thing. You know, you learn the Twi word, which Twi is a word spoken by 3 million people in Ghana. You're going to learn the Twi word for dog, and you know it's going to speak you the French word for dog or the English word for dog. You look down, you're going to see a little game you can play to make sure you know the word dog. And next thing you know, you're an adult, and now you know English, and you're watching Game of Thrones, and you're thinking in terms of whatever electronic stuff you're grabbing off the torrents, and you're thinking in terms of the culture whose language you picked up as a second language. Is that helpful? Next question? Definitely Mandarin's going to blow up too. Anyone? All right, well, thank you very much. And I hope you had a great Atlas camp, and go forth, Atlassians.